Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. So happy to have each and every one of you back today. I'm also very excited. We've got a very interesting guest. We've got Peter Bergman. Peter is an expedition leader and founder of Beyond Expedition Consulting. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be on the podcast.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I spoke with you, it was only a week or so ago, and was pretty intrigued with some of the stuff you've done in the past, and you offer what might not seem unique to you, but it seems unique to me, that you're working with companies to help them improve their programs. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Let's actually start there. Well, no, let's not start there. Your accent is a little different than mine, and through the power of technology, we're able to connect from anywhere in the world. So let's tell our listeners real quick, where are you right now?
So I'm in Sydney, in Australia, and it's actually
Go ahead.
Middle of winter, so probably not the idyllic Australian day by the beach. It's raining outside, but it's quite a nice one to be inside here and hanging out for some warmer weather to come.
So when you say winter, and I'm thinking Sydney, I've not been there that time of year, but you mentioned rain. Is it like really cold, or is it just not as nice as it is in the summer? What are we talking about?
It's not too bad here. I'd say it's a mild winter, so you can still go outside. It's just a little bit wet. It's not really stopping me from getting in for a swim down at the ocean, which is still quite nice. Water temperature is about 18, 19 Celsius, and it's probably about the same air temperature through the winter as well. It's just shorter days, but it's still nice. I do actually enjoy all times of the year here.
Cool. We're going to get into your past and kind of how you bounced around and how you ended up there in Sydney. But before we do that, I also want to give our listeners a real clear idea of what exactly it is that you do with Beyond Expedition Consulting without going into how you got there. Like, what service do you offer to your clients?
Yeah, sure. So I guess with the consulting side of things, before I got into the expedition industry, I did work for an environmental consultant, and that was my first professional job outside of uni. So I do have a background in the consulting, which I guess broadly speaking is kind of offering specialist services, specialist advice to operators, external companies. And I saw a real opportunity for that in the expedition industry as well, because it is a very niche product that companies offer, and it can be quite difficult to come across people with experience in particular parts of the world. And if you can have as much of that intel before actually taking guests for that experience, then it really helps to create a stronger product leading up to it, and I guess more confidence in the areas that you're going to as well. So that was kind of the idea behind it, simply from feeling as though I had a lot that I could offer in that space from my time having worked in the field in expeditions. And with the way that the expedition industry is going, there's just so much growth and a lot of new companies coming online that I saw an opportunity. So I'm really just trying to I guess network and get my name and my brand to different companies and see what happens with that.
Very cool. Peter, if you were down at the beach or just out for a beer or something there in Sydney, and you bumped into somebody and they said, "What do you do?" And you said, "Well, I'm an expedition consultant," they're probably going to have no idea what that means. So let's start with I think the consult part of it people kind of pick up on, but when you say the expedition industry or expedition tourism. In kind of your own mind or in your own words, what is expedition tourism or the expedition industry?
Yeah, sure. And you're right. It is one of those titles that you tell the majority of people you speak to, and they're not quite sure whether you're in
It
research
sounds cool, but
or
what is it?
tourism. It always sounds cool from the start, but yeah, exactly. So I would say when we refer to an expedition, it's usually more of an adventurous way of traveling to remote parts of the world. And that can be land-based, that can be ship-based. And my experience is actually limited to ship-based expedition cruising, we'd call it. And when you think about it, because a lot of these places that we go to are remote and there's not a lot of infrastructure, especially tourism infrastructure, it does make sense for you to travel there by ship or by the coast because you can essentially, take everything with you and you move to these different parts of the coastline of the country where there might not be airports or roads or piers, and you can essentially, access that part of the world. So for me, I'd say, yeah, expedition is taking tourists to go see remote, hard to access parts of the world, and within that, there's a whole range of ways you can go about it.
I imagine, just as I listen to you say that, I imagine that, like, I'd say, oh, so what I hear you saying is an expedition is maybe, I'm filling in some gaps here, but I feel like an expedition is where you go somewhere and you take everything you need with you, in a sense, whether that's
Well, you have
the
to,
ship,
yeah.
whether that's the ship, or that means tents, or that means some sort of, vehicle that you're traveling overland or something like that, but you're not staying in fixed locations, fixed hotels, and maybe organized campgrounds and stuff like that. Is that a fair way to kind of summarize what an expedition is, or am I missing something big?
Look, I would say it kind of depends which way you're looking at it. So if you're a guest who is going on an expedition, you would essentially expect to be, starting in one place and finishing in another place. And there's not going to be too much in terms of resupply or facilities in between. Now when you join a ship to go on an expedition, then everything you need is going to be on the ship, and it would be the responsibility of the crew of the ship to have everything supplied in advance that they need, because the ship would be going to places where it can't bunker again, it can't resupply with fresh produce or what it needs to be able to complete the expedition safely. And land-based would probably be more small groups that would be taking things like their own accommodation, or you might be staying in remote, shelters or huts along the way from one starting point to an end. So it's essentially an adventure, and what people would look to come away from feeling like they've gone to places that not many others have had the chance to go to. And it's taken some planning and effort to get there.
All right, very cool. I think that kind of helps me get my head around it. And hopefully, our listeners that aren't familiar with kind of the expedition part of the industry, I guess it's just like a serious adventure. Like we've got, this is the adventure travel podcast. And for some people, adventure might be eating street food in Bangkok. And I get that.
Yeah.
I personally, I love that type of adventure. But what you're talking about is something a few more moving parts probably than what the typical adventurous traveler might experience. You mentioned working with, there's a lot of new expedition companies and outfits kind of coming on board, and you talked about kind of helping them get their systems and everything kind of in place and before they start bringing guests. Would you say, so your ideal client is a company that's never taken a guest, helping them get up and running, or do you work with existing companies that have been out there for a while that want to change things up, bring you in? Like, give me kind of an idea. I think the helping an operation launch is kind of a little self-explanatory, but those companies that are already up and running, what type of things might they ask you to come in and consult on?
Yeah, sure. So when you think of expedition destinations, there's the kind of big ticket items, which would be the polar regions, and that's Antarctica. That is up in the Arctic, Greenland, Norway, Svalbard, Iceland, the Canadian Arctic, and these places would be kind of the forte of expedition cruising. And you you would assume most companies that are coming into operate into that area can and should have good, solid information about how to make the operation safe and where to take people and what you're trying to see there. So, from my perspective, that isn't all there is to seeing the world on expedition. There's, the whole rest of the world that is starting to open up as well. And these are tropical regions and subtropical regions and places where these ships might be spending 3 or 4 months down in Antarctica and then 3 or 4 months in the north. But, you have the other third of the year where the ships can go and explore, and that might be the South Pacific, it might be the Indian Ocean, West Coast, East Coast Africa. So I would say where I would feel like the most practical advice and maybe assisting companies with going to these newer regions where there's not so much previous track records, and the whole operations are different as well. You're not necessarily taking people onto ice or zodiac cruising around glaciers and icebergs. You're going to these beaches where there's some tiny remote cultures in the middle of the Pacific on a small island, and whether you've got 40 people or maybe you've got 300 people, you really need to think about how you want to have the guests experience that opportunity, because nobody really wants to be on a tiny island surrounded by 300 other, tourists at the same time. And it takes away from it takes
Doesn't
away
feel like
from,
an expedition anymore, does it?
well, exactly. Yeah. It's, we want a sense of authenticity, and that you're going to places that not many others have been to. So there's a thousand ways you could go about it, but I think what would be my opinion is that it shouldn't really be trial and error in these places. You should go and you should be really confident in the product and your operation plan and your itinerary before you go there, and have your guests, your clients who are experiencing that. And well, there's not a lot of people out there who have been to these places, and the fact that I have would be a big advantage to
Yeah,
companies who
yeah.
are looking to go there. Yeah.
I would think so. So what is this, like the practical part of it is like, is this all done with operations managers of these companies on Zoom calls, or do they actually bring you out and you spend 6 months with them? Is it a mix of that? Give me an idea of what the job actually looks like. Because is it something you could just do remotely from anywhere, or does it require you actually spending time with the teams and in these locations?
So again, could kind of go either way. For the most part, my consulting has been done remotely. So it would be from having conversations and, I guess, identifying a problem and finding a solution for it ahead of time. We are lucky the fact that, we can generally go ahead and plan and get information in advance of the ship actually being there. So you can look into things like, what the tides are going to be like, what the time of season is as well. That there's certain things that a customer might see and think, well, when I go there, I want to do that, but it can be highly seasonal. So, you wouldn't really necessarily advocate that you're going to have this perfect itinerary where everything goes to plan. If you're there in the wrong time of season, it might be the monsoon season, or it might be inaccessible because of certain reasons. So that's all these things that can be figured out in advance. They really help with the finished product that you deliver as well. So yeah, to answer your question, for the most part, mostly remote consulting, but not limited to that. If the opportunity were to come up where it would be to come and experience an expedition product, or see the guest flow from being on the ship to getting off the ship on the Zodiacs to going ashore, and how things work with different activities that are offered as well, giving advice and feedback and suggestions around that as well, which would be more practical, I guess, joining the expedition, and yeah, then post that
Right.
providing consulting on it.
Because I can imagine a scenario where I think of maybe like it's probably not a great analogy, but bear with me, an event planner. Like an event planner might do a lot of stuff remotely before an event to get everything set up, to work with their clients, to figure out what they need, the catering, the transfers, all this stuff. And then the company might say, okay, but we want you there when it happens. So if things go sideways, there's a couple reasons. One is because you're going to have to be there to deal with it, but also you're going to be there to deal with it. Because if this is a plan you help them put together, you have a certain level of expertise that maybe the ship crew doesn't have. And so I could see a scenario where spend 6 months coming up with this new itinerary, these new destinations or plans, and then having you go along just to kind of make sure things work the way they were supposed to. So
Hey, yeah, I'd love to do it.
yeah, all right.
I'd love to do it. Yeah,
Very cool.
there's expedition teams on board, and that is the forte of the expedition team, because you're not just planning for the next day, the day before. There is months and sometimes years involved in finessing what the idea of that day may be. Have a great day, it's successful, and then you're straight on to the next one. There's no stopping and patting yourself on the back. You have to kind of keep going, and it can be quite intense. But yeah, I mean, I still love going on ships and working as part of the expedition team and being an expedition leader. So that is something that I'll continue to do, and also try and create opportunities for when I'm not away in the field to be able to, also stay connected with the industry and identify opportunities as well, shoreside.
Now, I also recognize if we just look at the name of your business, okay, Beyond Expedition Consulting, that could mean two very different things. One could be you're consulting with companies that are running expeditions, but then somebody also could they could even go in and Google, I want to go on an expedition and I need somebody to help me set it up or help me choose the right one. So there's that side of it, more that travel planner or that also consultants that help people find the right expeditions. And I just wanted to bring that up just for clarity. Is that something you do, could do, would do, want to do, or is that something that's just the complete opposite side of the spectrum view?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that is something I could do and something that I would look to do in the future. There's a couple of ways to look at this, because there is a lot of readily available information out there, and expedition cruising is a real buzzword in travel at the moment, and people want to go to places like Antarctica, and you can find really good information quite easily on that. So I don't really feel like my place is to go to somebody and say, hey, if you want to go to Antarctica, here's a secret where nobody knows, you should go with this company, not this company. It can be very dependable on their budget, on their style of travel, whether they want luxury, ultra luxury, something more mid-range, how long you want to go for. And look, I would happily give my opinion on that 1,000 times over, but I also think it's not really me.
It's not your
It's not really
sweet spot.
me who
Yeah.
has the sweet spot for that. However, there's different degrees of that. You might have somebody who has a really big dream that they want to go to a place, somewhere they've seen. Let's keep using Antarctica, for example. But you know what? Maybe going on an expedition ship with, 200-300 others isn't really their style. Maybe they're in quite a fortunate position that they can be a bit more selective about, they want to travel luxury but discreet. There's a lot of interesting things happening in that space as well, where, it's probably slanted more towards ultra high net worth individuals and people and companies, but that information can be more difficult to come by. And these people would put a lot of trust in someone to say, we want this experience and we are willing to, take your advice on how to make that work. And yeah, in that regards, I'd say now that I've been involved in the industry a bit more, I'd say, okay, for you,
I can
I
help
kind of
with that.
know, I know what you're looking
Yeah.
for. Yeah.
What I hear you saying is for the listener out there that's listening to this that has enough money to charter a yacht and cruise around the South Pacific and visit these remote atolls with their family, private thing for a month or two, then you're perfectly willing to have a conversation with them. You'd love to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And it's
Yeah.
happening, it's happening all the time with these kind of, remote places that a lot of these people would have already been to, or maybe they've been to Antarctica. They've been to a lot of places, and they kind of think, now I want experiences. I want to keep collecting experiences rather than go here, where I've been to. But yeah, I think the expedition industry and the expedition ships, there's huge sales teams with companies, and they do a fantastic job, and all the information there, and the brochures are there as well. But look, if I feel like I can offer an angle that is a result of having actually been on an expedition ship and worked as an expedition leader and seen some different products, that is something that I'd be confident to offer advice on.
And I expect that somebody that owns a yacht that wants to go somewhere totally new might benefit from some of that consulting as well. They've got the boat, they've got a crew, they need some help with the ins and outs, and they can't just call somebody that books expedition trips to Antarctica and get that level of service. So it sounds like you might be a good fit for that type of scenario as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, and gone are the days where you can really just take a yacht into a country and sail it to an island, and expect that you can go ashore if it's a remote community. These things should be done properly, and you do need to. There's many countries that spring to mind with this, but you almost do need to have that kind of middleman role of somebody that is able to make the connection, because it's not a matter of getting to a place; it's a matter of being invited in to a community. That's a big difference.
Yeah, that's a long way to take your yacht, and then you get there and nobody wants to see you, and well, you didn't fill out the paperwork at the island 1,000 miles back, so you need to turn around and go back and fill out the paperwork. And yeah,
it would have happened for sure. Yeah, and yeah,
I've lived in the third world. I lived in the Caribbean for a while, which is not nearly as complicated as some of these places you're discussing. But I also recognize that things don't always happen the way you think they should happen, and it's good to have somebody that can kind of navigate. I get that. Let's get into your history. Let's figure out how the heck you got there, because I know you had a bunch of experiences along the way. Let's go back to, are you Aussie originally? Are you from Australia? I guess that's the first question. Were you born in Australia? Where were you born? What day?
Yeah, born and bred.
Was it morning or evening?
Aussie.
All right.
Morning,
cool.
actually, up in Queensland. I was born, so I had quite an adventurous childhood. Moved around quite a lot with my parents and my brothers, and I think went to 5 different primary schools, so I kind of changed school every year. And
but it
was an amazing childhood.
What was behind the moving?
Mostly my dad. He was adventurous. He loved to be in the northern parts of Australia, which we call the top end. So this is Northern Territory, this is the Kimberley, up around Cape York in Queensland. And he actually grew up here in Sydney, but when he got to his 30s and started to, want to just get away from the city and travel and camp and fish, he went up there, and he took my mum with him, and then they had us 3 boys when we were quite young. When they were up there as well. So we were quite young, moving around as a result of that, and had a few different jobs. But when you're young, you just think that's what everybody had when they grew up. And we were in these tiny little schools, or we go to these really remote parts of Australia camping, and really appreciate that now that I can look back on it.
Yeah. Could you put a finger on like his industry? If I said, what did your dad do other than move around and enjoy life and have various jobs? Was there a particular type of work that he specialized in?
Yeah, so he worked for an organization that would assist Indigenous communities in terms of getting some business infrastructure and, various ways that they can generate income into the community, whether that's selling artworks or whether that's, kind of having people come and visit the communities. These are really remote parts of Australia, which you often need permits to enter. And we would be, in these small regional towns, which would be the biggest place nearby with facilities. And then he'd go off into these, really remote Indigenous communities, which could be 2 or 3 days drive away. So yeah, we were just young kids who jump in the back of the car and head off and go on some of these adventures with him.
That's very cool. So you it sounds like you had the opportunity to maybe mix in with some of these indigenous communities a bit as well, or was that part of it?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, we've got
cool.
some awesome photos from when we were young, just little blonde-haired kids, in these communities and kind of walking around in our nappies and catching lizards and frogs and all that fun stuff.
Was it unusual for the kids in these communities? Was it unusual to see, the blonde kids with lighter skin that didn't grow up in their same communities? Was that unusual, or were they welcoming? What was that? What are your recollections of what that was like to show up in these little towns and communities?
Yeah, the remote communities, definitely. I mean, you would have small communities and there would be, doctors and teachers and nurses and people in similar positions to my dad coming into the communities. But I'm sure we were a bit of a novelty to a little blonde-haired kids running around, and even in the smaller kind of regional towns that we lived in, there was still opportunity to, we played sports and we went fishing and did things and went to school with indigenous kids as well. So I think probably from a really young age and through my dad would have a good interest and I guess some early knowledge in how unique and how amazing the Australian indigenous culture is. So yeah, that's
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 so
been quite
cool.
cool to now go back to these places a bit older and with work and kind of think, yeah, possibly that's a big reason why I ended up doing
Yeah,
these things.
I think so. And it's not just the Australian Indigenous community, it's just the fact that you were exposed. I think, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, that you were exposed to just differences. And that is just so eye opening. It causes so many people to want to go explore and learn more about the world. I actually, as you were sharing that, I remember my first real experience similar to that, not nearly as cool as yours, but my brother and I had the opportunity to travel to Australia when I was 12. He was a year younger, and we were in Canowindra, New South Wales. For me, felt pretty remote, like on the other side of the planet from where I grew up. And in this small community, the kids there, our age, didn't see a lot of people from the US, and especially children from the US, because it was not a touristy area. And I just remember the young girls there were just so fascinated by our accents, and they
Yep.
just wanted to talk to us, and they wanted to hear us say their names. So they'd say my name again, say my name again. And it
Okay.
was it was a cool experience for me that I link back to my desire to travel and explore different cultures, because it was the first time that I'd had an experience like that. I can't imagine going into some of these indigenous communities like you were doing when you're young. That's pretty damn cool. All right, did you at that time, let's say, roughly what age were you that you remember this type of thing? Was there a period of time that you felt like was the most adventurous or interesting, or as far as age?
Look, from my earliest memories, 3 or 4 years old, up until
Till
around
today.
about,
Till today. You've
yeah,
been on an
well,
adventure.
yeah,
That's cool.
well, it has felt like that sometimes, but I'll be honest, we did have a time around about high school age, so 12 to 17, 18, where we moved down to Victoria, which is in the south of Australia, where my mum is from. And we'd been down there, it was cold and it's cold winters down there, trust me. And we, knew that was where mum was from. And when it came to high school, we lived down there. So suddenly that I remember that dramatic shift where suddenly the days were more, you go to play sport and you go ride your bike after school, but there wasn't really much else to do. And, whereas we had this crazy upbringing where after school we'd kind of run down to our river just down the road and fish and catch brim and cook them in the sand. And that was on a Tuesday after school
Mhm.
when you're 8. So suddenly when you're a little bit older, and I think it was probably then where I realized, oh, this feels a bit more normal existence, and hey, you can stay in one place and at one school and make friends.
But did you, I'm sure you
Yeah.
had mixed feelings, but I guess, did you feel like that was, at the time, did you feel like that was a good thing to have a little bit more stability? Or were you resentful for your parents or whatever choices? We don't have to go too far
Yeah.
into the dynamics, but were you resentful when you moved south?
Not resentful. I think you're still a child, so you're still having fun. That was the main thing, and it was probably just consciously or subconsciously noticeably different to childhood, but it didn't completely fall away because my parents separated, and we would go and spend time with my dad. He stayed up there,
Okay.
so it wasn't go up there for 4 days over Christmas. We'd sometimes, I'd get a whole term off school and go stay with him for 3 months up there. And maybe he was meant to put me in school, maybe he wasn't, but I don't remember doing much school up there. But it was long. It was a long period of time to still stay in touch with that part of Australia, and I still get those feelings when I go back there now.
Yeah, yeah. If we were to go back in a time machine to when you were, I don't know, 15, 16, something like that, and I asked you, "Hey, young Peter, 15-year-old Peter, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Do you remember what you would have said?
Look, I probably couldn't pinpoint it to that age. I think it shifted around quite a bit, but there was definitely there was definitely a time where I remember I wanted to be a forensic psychologist. I think I was watching too much CSI.
Okay, interesting.
That was kind of the show, and didn't happen, of course, but that that's something I'd remember probably telling people around that age. And then I felt like I wanted to work outdoors. It was never really from 8 years old, I wanted to be a marine biologist, but I remember I wanted to not be in an office. That was quite a strong feeling. I'd probably given up on the watching CSI by then as well. And I think I kind of thought, hey, why can't I go work in a national park or something like a ranger? Would have been quite cool, and probably got as far as looking at that process. But yeah, then as I got towards the end of high school, started talking about what to study at uni. I went more that university pathway into what I studied.
So when you mentioned the forensic psychology, CSI, when
Yeah.
I think of CSI, like when I think back to the episodes that I'd seen, it actually is very attractive to, I think, people that end up working in tourism because they're not in the
Okay.
office, they're
Hmm.
out and about. It's about curiosity, discovery, new things. It's like I can see the parallel. I don't know if you ever considered it, but as I heard you say that, I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense because every day you wake up and it's something new, right? In a sense. So
Yeah,
I don't
true.
know. Yeah, maybe or
Yeah,
maybe
true.
I'm just
Yeah.
making
And
making things up. But let's talk about the difference between your parents. Like, if would your father have, like, if you said, "Yeah, I want to work outside, I don't want to be in an office," would your father been more supportive than your mother, or would it be about the same? Did they have two? Because your mom was pretty adventurous. She went up north with him and did that for a while. So I'm curious, like, would you get like for example, my dad was maybe more like your dad. We spent my summers with my dad traveling around, flying balloons, going to Australia, doing these things. And then my mother was the academic who was in school for many years and worked hard and had a path and a plan. And I remember I went to uni for about a year and dropped out to go join the army because I wanted adventure. My dad thought it was pretty cool. My mom was very upset. So I'm curious, like with your parents, did they both kind of support you equally in what you wanted to do, or was there some conflict there?
yeah, okay. So 100% they both supported me and my plans equally. And we're kind of those parents that were like, hey, as long as you do something you're happy with or something you love doing, you can do whatever you want. It
Wow.
wasn't do this
Both of
because
them
you
were like that.
both of them were like that. Yeah.
That's cool. All right.
My 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 dad, he had a father who was the opposite to that, who wanted him to be an accountant and work in an office and, have a 40-year career and get a Rolex. And my dad rebelled against that because, he didn't want to, I guess, plainly speaking. And that's why he went and did what he did and went on a more adventurous route. And yeah, my mom, I think she was just happy if we were happy. So, that was always probably something at the time, felt very little pressure to have to rush and make a decision and change my mind a few times. But yeah, that is something I can look back and say, hey, it probably did have a big bearing on how I ended up doing what I do as well, because you know could have easily been talked into other things, or everybody hears that you'd love to study marine biology and do that in uni, but there's no jobs. And I heard that 1,000 times and didn't really care, or thought, well, regardless, it's still going to be a cool thing to study, and you can dive, and I
Not
might be 30
everybody.
grand in debt at the end of it without a job, but I'll figure that out as I go.
There's a few different types of people on the planet, and some of them, when they're 18, are not thinking about what are the career prospects. It's just like what sounds fun and cool. And then there's a handful that are just thinking, okay, well, how am I going to make money doing this? And they will sit down and research what's the best way to make a bunch of money at 18, and then they'll choose that career path to go be a lawyer, or doctor, or whatever. And yeah, so it's interesting. So did you end up then going to school for marine biology? It kind of sounds like it, but I don't want to make that assumption.
Yeah, exactly. So I finished year 12, and then I went across to Perth in Western Australia and I studied environmental conservation biology for the first couple of years. So a Bachelor of Science. And then halfway through that, I went and had my first trip overseas. I went to Southeast Asia and started diving in Thailand and Vietnam, Philippines. And I thought, wow, that's actually pretty bloody cool, going down and learning more about the marine life, underwater world. And I was only one step away from taking my conservation biology degree towards marine science. So I shifted a few things when I got back to uni after that time off. And then I did my honors in marine science and started to, I guess, feel like I was studying to be a marine scientist, marine biologist.
You've got a dad up north, mom down south, and you went all the way to the west for school. Sounds like, am I getting that
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
that's right.
Was there what was that like when you packed up, and did you drive? Did one of them go with you? What do you remember of going off to school as far as dynamics in your family?
Yeah, okay. I think about this a bit because I had never been to Western Australia, and it was actually a recommendation from my careers advisor at school that said WA has a good university for marine biology. And my brother left home when he was 18, and he went up to Darwin, and I think I kind of wanted to get out of our town where we went to school and forge my own path. And I had a couple of mates who wanted to do a similar thing. They weren't going over there to study, but they knew they could find work. And we actually all set off one morning. I remember this quite vividly, and we all had our own car. And Australia's a big country, so
It is.
we drove to Perth, and that's about 3,500 kilometers.
And it's very beautiful scenic route, isn't it? I think in my mind, I imagine it
No,
being kind of flat, kind of
yeah,
flat and dry. Yeah.
yeah. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I think everybody should do it once. Once is probably enough. There's a lot of country where it's just flat, and you're passing road trains, and it's called the Nullarbor. So the Nullarbor is a treeless plain where you can just see for miles without any vegetation, and it's just kind of a big, well, not a desert, but there's just not a lot there.
Yeah.
And you're 18, so we were driving 10, 11 hours a day. I don't even think I drank coffee back then, so I'm not sure. It was just kind of, we were just running on that youthful energy that we're going to a new place. And I'd probably do it differently now, all in our own car, because we all wanted our own car. But yeah, our mums were kind of there at the side of the road when we left, and we kind of went around in a convoy, and the 4 days later arrived in our destination. Yeah.
Was was your mom visibly upset that you were going so far away?
I think she knew I
Or she's
wasn't out
just
of the
like,
blue.
okay, see ya. And all the
Yeah,
moms went and drank a bottle of wine after you all left, I'm sure. So, all right.
she's kind of used to it. I think I'm the middle boy, so three boys, all quite adventurous, and we've all left home, when we could.
Yeah, yeah. When did you decide to take up scuba diving?
I did that. Yeah, so I was in Thailand. I was on a 3 or 4 month trip through Asia, and everybody who was in Thailand, especially, backpack age, would go to a place called Koh Tao and scuba dive. And I definitely had that as part of my intended trail as I went, just, slowly making my way through Thailand, and just kind of took to it. I loved the training, doing the course and learning the theory behind it, and then I guess learning the biology, oceanography aspects of it as well. And yeah, never really planned to do it more than recreationally, but I knew it went hand in hand with a marine science degree.
Hmm.
But that was
Yeah.
that was where I started, yeah.
And the trip to Southeast Asia, you said a few, what, 3 or 4 months that you were backpacking around?
I think it was meant to be three. I think it was meant to be three, but it stretched out to about, yeah, 5.
So did you take a whole semester off from school, or how did you didn't manage to squeeze that into a break, or did you do, I'm just kind of curious how that all, because I think Aussies, Kiwis, some people, even Europeans, probably more so than Americans, will take some sort of break, a gap year or whatever, and they'll just go backpack around Southeast Asia, for example. So I'm just kind of curious how that fit into your life.
Yeah, okay, good question. And I can I can distinctly remember what triggered Southeast Asia in my mind. And well, actually my dad passed away when I was in my second year of uni. So that was obviously, a huge thing to deal with. And I ended up taking a year off uni, and I went and worked for 6 months, saved up a bit of money, and I came across a Lonely Planet on Southeast Asia on a shoestring. It's like the how to travel budget in different parts of the world. And I remember flicking through, and I'd probably heard about Thailand and Indonesia and a few other places around Southeast Asia, but I didn't really understand that part of the world very well. And I remember just reading that you could stay for $3 or $4 Australian at some places, and you know, chicken and rice was 50 cents, and you can get 50-cent beers. And I thought, hang on, if I've got
That's
this
the
number of,
backpacker decision making process right there, and
yeah,
the digital nomad process, because I'm living that life. I get
yeah,
it. Let me
yeah,
ask you
and it's
this:
it's probably, yep.
if you would have, because the way I heard you describe that was, I came across a Lonely Planet Southeast Asia travel book. If you'd
Hmm.
happen to run across a Lonely Planet South America or Latin America travel book that said you could do it for the same costs and same prices, I guess what I'm asking, do you think you were already kind of inclined to go to Asia, or was it just that that's the first book you picked up that said you could get 50-cent beers?
Okay, well, I guess Australians have a bit of a love affair with Bali. So I
Yeah,
had heard
I
about,
know. I've been to Bali. Everybody there thought I was from Australia just because of the way I looked. Yeah. Huh?
okay, yeah, yeah. So I knew about that. I hadn't been there. I hadn't been overseas by this stage. So I think I was 19, and it was where I started. So I always wanted to, yeah, there was something about Southeast Asia that really appealed to me. And South America, similar process, kind of something happened, or I heard about it, or I met some people from there, or came across another Lonely Planet book. And but Southeast Asia, I think, is just such a ideal destination for someone, kind of between 18 and 21, where everything's kind of easy, kind of forgiving. You don't need a lot of money to get there or to stay there, and and when you're there, it's suddenly this feeling of being completely free in another part of the world that's so different to Australia. So that was a big appeal to see somewhere that
You're
felt
right.
different, like I'd left
Yep.
home,
Yep.
and then suddenly your conversations open your eyes to, well, maybe I can. I didn't know I would go to Cambodia, for example, but everyone was going there, and everyone was saying, "Oh, you have to go there. It's so different to here." And so I went there, and then up to Laos, and so yeah, I still love Southeast Asia. It's one of my favorite parts of the world, and I think a big reason is because I was so immersed while I was there. This was before you could kind of travel with Wi-Fi and scroll on your phones on a bus ride. You'd have one book, you'd have you'd have your little music player if it worked and if it had battery. Otherwise, you just stare out the window on these long bus trips and look at people going about their life, and that really resonated with me. It kind of made me curious about how somebody grew up there compared to where I grew up.
Do you think there was a point, or do you remember a point where you went from kind of the marine sciences to somebody that was really going to be traveling and leading expeditions? Or because I can imagine marine sciences means, oh, I probably want to travel the world and do marine sciences. I don't know. I guess I'm curious. Were you already thinking you would be traveling the world as a marine scientist, or was there some point where you said, you know what, I just really want to go travel and explore? I don't know if it's not a very clear question, but I'm curious what's coming up for you when I ramble on like.
Yeah, no, I get you. So when I was studying, we would talk about kind of three pathways that you could take out of uni. One of them was to stay in research and keep researching. One of them was to get into public domain. So, you might work for the Department of Fisheries, Department of Environment. All of these options are competitive, really. And then the third was more private. So that's what I ended up doing, working for a consultant, probably more office-based, writing reports than I would have liked. And that's all we really spoke about. And, I was grateful to have been given an opportunity to work in consulting, but it wasn't really what I foresaw myself, doing as a career.
Yeah, because
And then,
let me ask you this real quick, Peter, because
yeah,
the three paths you just described on the
yeah,
surface sound, I don't want to say sedentary. Sedentary is not the right word, but location specific. So I imagine doing research, you might be at a university, you're in a lab somewhere all the time. Maybe you're close to the ocean and maybe you're doing something locally. And fisheries and stuff would probably be tied to a specific region. The
hmm
consulting, private sounds all tied to a specific region. Is that kind of right with those three paths
yeah, I'd say
for the
for
most
the
part?
majority of it, every position would be location dependent, and maybe you'd get lucky and get assignments to go travel and research in other parts of the world or work in other parts of the world. But for the most part, that was kind of your line of thinking would be, where do I want to live and work?
Okay, and it sounds like you wanted to go a different direction. So let's pick up there. And what did you not like about those three paths, and what did you really want to do at that?
Well, I think I could I could envision a perfect lifestyle around about that age when I was out of uni and I was working, and I could see where my pathway was taking me if I just stayed doing what I was doing. And I could also see an opportunity to be able to and travel as a job, really. But mind you, I listed those three options and I didn't know this at the time and nobody did. Nobody had heard about working as a marine biologist on an
On an
expedition,
expedition, Jeff.
right?
I know,
Yeah,
right?
and I swear if we knew about that, everyone would have just been lining up and, get out of my way. I want that job. What do you mean you can travel to a place like Antarctica with this degree I've just earned and get paid and that's my job now? When this was 2014, 15 when I graduated. So the industry would have definitely, existed, but it would have still been difficult to come across anybody who
They
works
were
in it or
they weren't probably putting flyers up at the university saying, "Come be a biologist on our Antarctica cruises or our cruise to through the South Pacific."
not
It wasn't
not
something
at
they were
all.
actively recruiting on campus for, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think they needed to actively recruit because,
Yeah, they don't need to.
as
But
the
but how did
no.
you figure it out? So how did you figure it out?
Well, it links back quite neatly into my trip to Southeast Asia in a way because I took that year off and I left Perth and I did another road trip up to Darwin, and about halfway along that on the WA coast is a place called Exmouth and the Ningaloo Reef, and the Ningaloo Reef is amazing. It's almost the West Coast version of Great Barrier Reef, but on the west coast, and that is famous for a number of things, but mainly whale sharks come into that reef to feed only for a few months of the year. And I always knew you could do this tour, which took you out to go swim with them. And these are these huge kind of 10
Yeah.
meter plus whale sharks. And I really wanted to do that. So I did that on the way driving north. And when I was on that boat, I was on there by myself because the the couple of mates who I was doing this road trip with, they didn't want to go out on the boat. So I was kind of just chatting to whoever was on the boat, and I met this one guy, and he was a few years older, but he had studied marine biology as well. So we kind of naturally just hit it off, and he was working more kind of in ecotourism around that part of the world. And we swapped details, and I think back then you kind of add someone on Facebook, and that was what you did. So I had him on Facebook, but by this stage he wasn't working in expeditions, but shortly after he started to, and he was on his Facebook profile suddenly posting these pictures of him in Antarctica, South Georgia with king penguins, up in the Arctic taking photos of polar bears, in Papua New Guinea, and something obviously clicked, and I thought, okay, this guy, he studied what I studied. We kind of have kept in touch, and then I asked him. I still didn't know exactly what he did. I thought he was maybe a Nat Geo photographer and had a bit of a career change. But he said, yeah, look, I'm in expedition cruising. It's kind of new. It's kind of booming at the moment. So there's a bit of work around if you're interested. You have the degree for it, kind of have the desire to want to do that as a career. So you'll probably be in a good position to start with. And funnily enough, as it goes on, I ended up working at the same company as him, and we actually worked together. He was the expedition leader, and I was his assistant. About 2 or so years after I started in the industry, we ended up working together on the same ship. So that was kind of sweet how that all came about. And yeah, still friends to this day.
Sometimes those connections are pretty damn important, aren't they?
Yeah, you never know it at the time, but you can look back and think, well, maybe if I decided to go another day, or I didn't go because my mates didn't want to go,
Or you didn't have Facebook or whatever.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And it's one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the conversations we have here on the podcast is most people, that I chat with have a moment like that, or somebody that maybe didn't seem like it was making a huge influence at the time, but then it turned out to be that way. But I also want to ask you, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you, it's a little personal, I guess, but part of what also put all these wheels into motion, actually, it sounds like, was your father's passing. And,
Yep.
And the way you described him earlier as being kind of that type of personality, that type of person that's just going to go and take risks and take these chances, which obviously had a lot of influence on you. To kind of tie all that together, because what I hear is like a legacy. I kind of hear this legacy thing. And even with the timing of his passing, that really put a lot of wheels into motion for you. And I'm just wondering if this is just what I'm making up in my head, or is this something that you've considered as well?
It's all very connected to the decisions I was making around that age. And, it's that kind of, any time's tragic time to lose a father, of course, but when you're, kind of in those real formative years of your life, and probably just starting to see yourself as an adult who can have adult conversations with your parents, and I guess get their perspective on a similar time to their life, or you start to see them as, not your parents, but people who have had their whole life and can kind of offer so much in terms of, guidance and advice, or, especially like a son to their father. You want to say, how did you do this? Like, how did you kind of process this situation? Or, I'd have 1,000 questions now. I'd love that opportunity to ask. But the thing for me is I was obviously grieving, and a normal existence felt like the opposite thing to do, or to keep going about to keep on the path I was on. It felt like I needed a disruption, and a big one. So for me, that was, uni's not where I want to be right now. I don't want to be around, I don't want to sit in a classroom. I don't want to, laugh in conversations with people when I don't feel like I didn't want to be back in the life I had before he passed away. So I kind of upended everything, and that's when I took that year off to just give myself a chance to, have any number of paths that I could take from there. And it wasn't really the plan to go overseas. Wasn't really the plan to stay in somewhere like Southeast Asia for 5 months, but I think that 12 months of time was a good amount for me to be able to, first of all, go through the grieving process, and I moved up to Darwin, which is where he lived, and I spent about 6 months up there working with my stepmom who was with him at the time. So spent kind of a lot of time, in his space, not down in Perth, away from everyone. So I felt like I was up there, and I was where he would have been. And then I kind of got through that, or well, as much as a young man probably thinks they got through the death of their father. And I was like, okay, I need adventure, and I need a stimulus, and I need to be shocked a little bit, because everything feels a little bit safe here, in our very lovely existence we have in a place like Australia. So it would have had a big bearing in the fact that I chose Southeast Asia, and went to places where there's a lot of in your face, poverty, and just as grim as it sounds, probably sadness in these parts of the world, where you're probably powerless to really change anything, but it almost broadens your perception of how the world really is. And yeah, maybe I just had a big capacity for something like that, because I'd felt this pain from his death, that suddenly it was like, oh, okay, well, life's just not a little rose-colored journey you go on. It's all these other bigger things that are actually what's really important. So yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, obviously, given the choice, I know, I trust that you would have, so you could still ask him those questions and still connect with him. And sometimes when something like that happens earlier in life, it gives us an opportunity to kind of have that moment that some people don't get until it's too late. That moment of, okay, life doesn't last forever, and we've got one chance to fill it with what we need to fill it with. And sometimes when we have a loss a little earlier on, it gives us a little bit more of that, like, okay, I'm not invincible. Or you're like me, that didn't really have any major losses until I was, in my, I'd say my mid 40s, when I got divorced. I just thought I was invincible. I still kind of think I'm invincible, but my parents are still alive, so I haven't had to deal with that yet. And yeah, so it's when we see people that, go through divorces, and then all of a sudden they sell all their stuff and go start traveling, or they change careers, or they realize that, hey, I'm going to do something here. And it sounds like maybe you had that opportunity at let's say an opportune time, but it sounds like maybe you had a little bit of that experience that not all of us get, fortunately. I mean, it's not a pleasant experience, but did you have a chance to chat with him before his passing? Just curious, was there, did you have kind of those moments of, advice, encouragement, or was it more unexpected?
Look, it was yeah, kind of both of those things, because we knew he was unwell, but he got sick very quickly, and then suddenly it was phone call, you should come up here. We're not sure what's going to happen. There is a chance that he's not going to make it. So did get that opportunity to go and be by his bedside when he was really unwell, and we'd had those conversations that he was dying. And I guess maybe my mind created this thing where it was going, well, the opportunity's there to have a chat, so let's have the chat. And kind of didn't really. And I'm not ever going to know exactly, the reasons why it wasn't like a, sit down and kind of, hey son, this is life. And I think death's such a personal experience as well, and I'd probably never really know what my dad was going through at the time as well. I do see it as being fortunate to be by his side when he died, because that is when you want to have your loved ones around. And if there's anything you can take from it that's slightly positive, it's the fact that we were able to be up there as a family together. But yeah, in terms of thinking about those questions, I now would have moments almost on the daily where I think, I'm a similar age to my dad, and he was 58 when he passed away, and I distinctly remember being 29, and I still feel pretty young to be honest, but I still felt so young at 29. And I remember thinking, I'm at the halfway point of when he died so it's like if the same thing happens to me, I've lived over half my life already. And it just took me a lot to get my head around that, and maybe a little bit of a, hey, you know what? Some things aren't that important that we spend a lot of time fixated on, and it's really about just living life because it can be taken away unexpectedly or before you think it's your time. So yeah, now I'm 37, and my dad was 30, 35, 36 when he met my mom, and he took her on this crazy adventure, of course, and she was younger. So I, I think of all these things now that would kind of be nice to say, hey, Dad, I almost feel like you, when you were my age, and I'm sure you were kind of going through similar things that I am. But yeah, you kind of just recall on the times you did have together, and you feel almost like you were guided through that for these times in your life as well. And I've still got my mom, and my mom's like amazing in every way. So her and my dad, they separated, but they always had a really, it was still a loving post relationship. They were still both our
Yeah, I
mom and
get it.
dad.
Well, my parents are divorced.
There was no
get
slight
that, yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something in mind if I asked you, hey Peter, what's the thing that you've accomplished since you lost your dad that you wish you could tell him the most, or the thing that you think that would make him the most proud? What would it be?
Ooh, there's probably one answer to this, which I'll think of down the trail after this podcast, because I have had moments where I thought my dad would be, proud of me now doing this. But
Probably a
there'd be a
bunch of
hundred
there's
things.
probably a bunch of
Yeah,
them because I'm thinking he like if there was a social media that we could post things for our family that are no longer with us, it's like, hey Dad, I'm in Antarctica. Hey Dad,
yeah,
I'm with polar bears and clients, and I'm living this life exploring and fishing, and I don't know if you still fish, if that's a thing or not, but just these things that I can imagine will be like, hey Dad, look what I'm doing.
yeah,
And as a tribute, not as a bragging, but as a tribute to like, geez, Dad, I probably wouldn't be doing these things if it wasn't for you.
yeah, definitely. And the example that comes to mind is, and probably like what I'd consider one of my proudest moments is leading an expedition, because you are the face of the expedition product and the face of the team. And I'm not naturally a very outgoing or extroverted personality type. The position calls upon me to step into that and, be on stage and I guess be a presence and make big decisions. And I guess there was a real sense of personal pride when I realized that I was doing that. Not the first one's always the toughest one, and the big relief when you have a successful expedition, but then to repeatedly, you know, prove to yourself and prove to others that you're capable. And yeah, I reckon there'd be a moment where he'd probably see me, in that little fraction of what it is being an expedition leader on stage, kind of presenting the finished product and the team, and kind of, I would think, that that's well done. Well done for
As
getting yourself into that position.
I love that. As I listen to you share that, I imagine my son. I've got a 19-year-old son, and I've worked in tourism for a while. I've led nothing to the left, and I've kind of been in charge of some things. And so for me to imagine seeing my son Jackson, as an expedition leader on an Antarctica cruise or whatever, just like, wow, how freaking cool is that? Because they're always your kid,
Yeah,
right? So when your kid grows up and does stuff like that, it's just like, how freaking cool. So I'm sure he'd be very
yeah,
proud of you. Thank you for sharing that. That was not my plan to go that deep into things, and I know it wasn't your plan, but I really appreciate you opening up and sharing that, because somebody needs to hear these messages, right?
definitely.
Somebody
Yeah,
just
and
needs to hear these messages, whether it's a father or son or whatever. It's because we all have regrets, but we also have inspiration and motivation and things that keep us going. So thank you for sharing that. I do want to make sure we don't miss any important steps, because kind of where we left off before we, got into the conversation of your father and his legacy was kind of around, you mentioned that you had the guy that you met when you were swimming with the whale sharks, and then you worked for a couple of years and ended up working with him. And I want to touch on some of the other highlights that have happened since then to kind of get you to the point where you are now. So I'm not sure where to pick up on that,
Yeah,
but what
sure.
pops into your mind?
Okay, well, look, I was very lucky that the company I first started working for in expedition cruising, a company called Silversea, they had 3 ships. And when I looked at their website, they go all over the world. I forget all the numbers now, but every continent, polar regions, tropical regions. So I started in the industry and at a company where I didn't really have to ever leave or look for other opportunities. Opportunities came by, and I was probably very fortunate in the fact that I could go to a place like Antarctica, but because I was Australian and my manager knew I grew up in, the northern parts of Australia, which is actually an amazing expedition destination in itself, and Silversea goes there in the Kimberley. So it was a logical fit to go to the Kimberley, and then, you kind of finesse your polar guiding skills and your tropical guiding skills, and you become probably more of a generalist in how you can work on ships. You're not really specialized to one particular region or polar versus tropical. So it's one of those careers you say yes to everything because you want to, not because you get your contracts 12, 18 months in advance and they say, well, we want you to fly to Greenland to join the ship here, and then you're going to finish in Canada 2 months later, and then we want you to start the next one in Costa Rica and finish down in Terra del Fuego. And I read it and sign it straight away and send it back and like, yep, I'm sure. Like, of course I'll do that. It sounds amazing.
A couple things on that, because you mentioned silver. Is it Silver Seas or Silver Sea? Silver Seas, right?
Silversea,
Silver
Silversea
Sea.
Expeditions. Yep.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So what I noticed is when you and I first spoke, I had made a mention on LinkedIn that you were going to be coming onto the show, and all of a sudden I started like making all these connections with people at Silversea Expeditions, and I noticed like, oh, I think that's connected to Peter, and then people would start saying, oh yeah, I used to work with Peter. I worked with him for a while. He's great. I'm so excited to hear his conversation with you. So I want to mention that in the sense that there's people still there that are really paying attention to what you're doing and obviously think very highly of you. So that's super exciting for me. I hope that's exciting for you as well. So
Yeah, no, I didn't know that.
I'm
I think
happy
there's a
that you
connection there,
mentioned
but I
my
didn't.
name.
Yeah,
I didn't want to bring that up
yeah,
unless you mentioned it. But the question I have is because you've mentioned twice during this conversation about it's winter in Sydney, so it's a little cold. And then you said something about when I moved down south, it was cold. So I heard you use the word cold twice. And it's not lost on me that we're having conversations about places like Greenland and Antarctica and all these places. Do you like the cold? Is that like something you actually like about it? Or I just curious. Like I know it's part of the
yeah.
job, but do you like it?
I like a balance, I would say, and
A balance is
yeah,
50
that's
degrees
probably
Fahrenheit.
yeah. Okay, no, sorry, a balance of extremes. I go from Antarctica, and my next contract will be 35 Celsius in the tropics, and
Uh-huh.
swap parkas and waterproof gear for board shorts and sandals, and that was again back to the fact that I I kept saying yes to everything because I was getting this amazing balance with my contracts that I was getting, but also the different activities you get to do on this as well. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't say I necessarily prefer one over the other. I do think polar regions are the domain of expedition. That's kind of where when we talk about the early explorers, famous names who went down and discovered Antarctica and had these harrowing stories of survival, and we read books about them now and we watch documentaries, or if you're fortunate enough you go to these places and you see the huts that they overwintered in, and it's almost the part of the world which is going to ask the most of somebody to come down because that's where it's most challenging. It's crazy storms and weather, and it's inhospitable. So if you want to feel like you go away and you go on a proper expedition, then you go to the polar regions like that. But in saying that, these days we do it so comfortably on luxury expedition ships, and you can be in a place like that and see the hut where they survived and ate penguin eggs and seal meat, and then you learn about that, and then you'll go back and have a nice hot shower and, have some
Sit in
wine
the
and
hot tub
caviar
on
over
the
dinner
deck of the
and
boat. Yeah, yeah.
sit in the
A
hot
little
tub. So
different.
it's a little bit of a
A little
crazy
different.
juxtaposition.
But let me
But
ask
yeah,
you.
you just have to be, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just want to ask an example is the polar plunge, which I haven't done it, but I've seen it. I've heard it. I've heard a little bit about it, which in my mind, when I say that, maybe I'm saying it wrong, is when the passengers sometimes have the opportunity to jump into the polar water and then very quickly get back out.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to ask you if you've done it. I'm assuming you've done it probably a few times. But is that something like is exhilarating for someone like you, or are the expedition leaders like, yeah, I've done that, I don't need to do that, I'm just here to supervise? Or is it something you actually want to do with the clients?
Well, there's two different people essentially. You'd be pretty hard pressed to find an expedition leader, expedition guide who hasn't done the polar plunge because it's kind of a rite of passage, and we would usually try and do one each season, whether that's in the Antarctic, up in the Arctic, because they're both polar plunges, and even better if you've done both. Some some are a bit more crazy in the fact that they'll do it every opportunity they can. I'll see how I feel. The reason you do a polar plunge, it's going to be the best hot shower you've ever had straight after.
Does it hurt though? Does the hot
Yeah,
water hurt?
it's a good pain. It's a good pain.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't been on a ship yet that's ran out of hot water, so you can have a 20-minute hot shower and slowly heat yourself back up. And they're pretty fun about it. There's pump up music, everybody's in line kind of dancing and in their robes ready to do it and psyching each other up. There's normally the bar team are down there with a bit of liquid courage to help people get over the line and finally jump. But yeah, it's mostly fun and it's pretty safe. Pretty
I
safe.
think the last video I saw, and maybe I missed it before. I haven't watched a lot of videos of this, but I seem to recall, like, don't your clients, your guests, like, you tie a rope around them, right? So like when they jump in, just in case they can't get back to the ladder, is that
Yeah,
true, or
exactly.
am I missing
Yeah.
something?
No, that tends to be kind of industry standard these days. Everyone who plunges will have gone through a medical assessment, so not everybody who wants to can. You do need
It
to
sounds
sign
like
about a
so much
four-page
fun.
double-sided waiver. Yeah, it's fun until people kind of think, maybe I don't have the ticker, or have in a condition medically where they probably shouldn't expose themselves to something like that. So it's all yeah, it's all vetoed by the medical team, and you have the ropes on there. People learn to swim pretty fast if they don't know how to swim when they jump in there. But the rope's just a little bit, sometimes there's a lot of flapping around, which isn't really getting them closer to where they need to get to.
I
So you
bet,
can give them a little nudge.
because I've been around enough guides and I've been around enough clients that I can imagine, like, you've got clients that all week are moving really slow. And I'm not knocking them. They're on vacation. They can move whatever speed they want to move at. But you've got clients that just seem like, wow, this person moves really slow. They're always the last one to breakfast. They're always the last one to the Zodiac or whatever. And then as soon as they jump off the deck, you're like, holy cow, I had no idea that person could move that fast. Is that, or I'm just
Yeah.
imagining this, but I suspect you guys are like, now he's moving really fast, or she, or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's funny, right? And sometimes you'll only have one ladder to get back up. So two people jump at a time, and that can create some quite interesting relationship dynamics, especially if the
like
guy forgets that he, needs
husband
to
and
be
wife,
chivalrous in
and
that
he's like,
situation.
he's pushing her away from the ladder as he's climbing out. Yeah,
But
that
yeah,
could
no,
be
I've
a.
seen it all. I've seen it all, and you stay out of that. You let them
Guys do that.
decide.
Do you guys do that on purpose? That kind of sounds like you're asking for trouble. You should not let
Yeah,
couples that are traveling, like that are married or in a romantic relationship, you should not let them both jump at the same time. Would be my consultation for a new expedition company.
oh, they should just have the conversation before they jump, so they're both on the same page with who should be getting out first.
Well, wait a minute. You've never been married yet, have you? I can tell.
Okay,
I
well,
We haven't even got to
I
that
have
part of the
things to learn.
conversation, but I can just tell
I
because you say, oh, you should discuss it first, because I was, people that have been married for a while, even more the ones that are divorced, recognize that you can have all kinds of agreements in the beginning. That stuff tends to change really quickly when things get hot or cold. So anyway,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah, I've seen it.
Enough of that, Peter. So So you're working with Silversea, and then kind of what are the next big, we're talking about jumps. Let's say, what is the next big jump that kind of moved you closer to where you're at now?
So I got an opportunity as a what's called a staff assistant, which is more of an admin role on board. The thing when I first got offered employment with Silversea was you could work as a lecturer, which is, giving presentations and guiding, but there was a big backlog of marine biologists who could work as lecturers. So I would have had to wait about 18 months for that contract to come around. And then my manager gave me an opportunity to come on board earlier, and it was to Antarctica as a staff assistant. And, kind of bit of a different role. You're not presenting, you're not giving lectures, but you're still part of the team, and you're still, going out there and enjoying everything, and, doing a bit more admin work on the computer in the office. But that opportunity put me really close to the expedition leader in terms of working in the same space and learning about the planning and how things kind of, really come together on an expedition, not just with the team, but all the other departments. And suddenly I was like, whoa, okay, we don't just drive a boat around and show people penguins. There's this whole other conflicting, working together, but conflicting priorities of what needs to happen on a ship for it to be successful. And I got maybe 2-3 years kind of in that position, a couple of promotions. I'd also worked as a lecturer, a naturalist by that stage. And I got given the question, do you want to work towards becoming an expedition leader, or would you like to focus more on, being a marine biologist on board and keep that kind of career path? And I hadn't worked as an expedition leader, but there was a part of me that felt like I could do it. And, you hear that not everybody wants to be an expedition leader because there's all these amazing positions you can have when you're not the expedition leader and responsible for everyone and, the everything and kind of the expedition team, the connector to all the other departments. But I was up for the challenge, and yeah, then a couple of things happened where I had to step into the role before I was ready. I didn't necessarily feel like I could do it at that stage, or hadn't had enough experience. I wanted to shadow some more expedition leaders, but it got to a simple point where the expedition leader didn't come. So I was the next one in line, and it wasn't, hey, do you want to step up? It was, hey, you are the expedition leader from, in 3 days' time. And I think that's the kind of the not so gentle push everybody needs to get to that first step towards working as an expedition leader and being in the position. And then you just rely on your training and what you know, and you kind of rely on those around you who are a source of information, and everybody's really kind of supportive because no expedition leader knows everything, and if they think they do, then they don't. So yeah, that was my transition towards then being predominantly an expedition leader, and then that's been 4 or 5 years now. I've worked in that role, and that's kind of the top position in an expedition team.
Yeah, I
So
would think so.
I didn't really see it as where do I go to from here. I saw it as I want to, stay in this role, but I also want to, look after myself in terms of longevity in the industry, because it does really put you in situations which can take a toll. High stress, high challenging. You're responsible for the safety of a lot of people. You're also getting pulled in 100 different directions from, other managers, other departments who want things done a certain way to help make their life easier as well. And yeah,
And, and Peter,
you do things well. Yep.
obvious question that I think everybody wants me to point out, or I don't know if it's a question, but also it's like at some point, because you talked about where your dad was at this age and, married, meeting your mom, and like, how do you have a relationship as a full-time expedition leader? Honestly, that's where I want to go with this, because I see that as like, that could be a thing that would make people want to kind of look for other picking up on this well or not.
Okay. Well, honestly speaking, there are a lot of successful relationships of expedition staff, and
Are they on the
whether that
same
means
ship?
they have a partner, yes.
Okay, okay,
I
all
would
right.
say some are, but most would have relationships with their partner back home. And it's a demanding job. It can be 6+ months of the year you're away on a ship, and you can still be in touch, but you're not physically there. So the other side to that is usually when we're off the ship, we're completely free. So you can almost, I guess, have an arrangement there if your partner is willing for you to be away because it is your career, it is your livelihood, it's something you love doing, and they are okay with that arrangement, then that works perfectly fine. Like you said, quite often they can both work maybe in the same team, share a cabin, and essentially have part of their life on ships together, part of their life off ships. But it can be difficult
that could be challenging too. There's
yeah,
a fine line between not enough time together and too much time together. Because
yeah,
if you,
yeah. Normally,
I managed to lodge in Belize with my ex-wife, and we were on a very, very small island. It wasn't much bigger. It probably wasn't any bigger than the expedition ship. It was very small, and yeah, that can be a challenge as well. Because
it can be,
you're
yeah,
either with guests, other staff all the time.
all the
It's
time,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that can be a challenge regardless of whether you're in a relationship. It's this very unique lifestyle where you're always around people, and for a lot of that time you're an employee where you're actually doing your role, but you're also a human being on a ship that still has their, needs in terms of being able to find some time for yourself or, you know, going about your usual routines that you try and do whether you're on a ship or not. But I think people can find it difficult to get to that foundation with somebody if you work in this industry and you're single because it's this amazing lifestyle and opportunity, but you're rarely in one place for longer than 6 weeks. So that's a very short amount of time, I guess, to form a relationship, have any have any strong foundations to it before suddenly hey, I'm off to Antarctica for 2 months and I was planning on coming back here, but I actually have 2 months planned in Bali because I love being there that time of year. And then I go over to the Arctic to work. So in December, I'll be back if you're still around. And
Have you heard of the attachment theories where they've got like some people are anxious attached, some people are dismissive avoidant, and the dismissive avoidant just is very happy with a lot of space. It might work really well for
yeah, I have heard of these and I know what I am.
yeah. I know what you are too, just based on your job title. No, just kidding. No, I get it. It's the same thing with the digital nomad thing. It's like, yeah, no comment. Let's change. This is not a relationship podcast. So anyway, so what I heard you saying was you working as an expedition leader, you realize that there's some limitations there. Obviously, there are with anything in life. And it sounds like you were saying that that's kind of why you started the consulting business. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but lead me into that. And is it something that you're able to do both?
Yeah, sure. So ultimately, I would like to continue to work on ships because I don't think anything ever beats going away on an expedition, working on the expedition team, leading expeditions, and continuing to have that aspect of your career, which is what you love, travel and, essentially earning an income from it. But for me, I don't necessarily want to continue to spend 6+ months of the year on a ship. I do want to have all those things like a partner, a family, pets as well, a lifestyle at home where it's a bit more of a normal land-based existence and then can almost cherry pick in some way. Hey, this 4-week contract to Antarctica looks awesome in December, so I might go do that. Or I'd love to go back to the South Pacific because I miss the tropics and the ship I work on is going there. So that's what I want to do. But it's not your, the majority of your time isn't on the ship, and that's not your main kind of identity, which I figured out was important for me. I want to be someone who goes away and works on ships, but I don't want that to be all encompassing of my life and my decisions. So it was one of those quite obvious situations I found myself in, which is I don't want to step completely away from the industry. I know there's a lot of opportunity in there to be able to do things like the, advice and preparations and consulting for companies in the industry. And even better, if it can be remote where I can, have some contracts and work coming in for me to do while I'm shore based because, I could definitely go into a completely different industry, but I don't think I need to, and I don't really want to.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. Is Sydney, are you in Sydney because that's just where you want to be land based, or is there strategically, logistically, is it just a really good place for the type of work you do? Or I guess my
Uh,
question's going to come down to when you're land based, you can live anywhere in the world you want to live. Where do you want to live? Are you or are you?
yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, I have only just moved to Sydney, so I've been here for about 6 weeks, and it was a little bit of both. There was a decision where I did want to be back in Australia, just to be a little bit closer to family, and it's easy for me to get to, where my family is down in Victoria from here. It's only an hour flight. I was in Bali for 4 years before this, so that was where I would spend my time in between ships, and it was ideal for me. That's the lifestyle I wanted, and I'd go to somewhere, tropical and warm, and love the culture, love the food, love the kind of everyday existence there in Bali. But after 4 years, I felt a little bit like I was just repeating the same patterns, and Sydney was a choice for me because yes, if you're going to be an expedition company in Australia, usually your office is in Sydney, so there are Australian expedition companies whose headquarters are here in Sydney, and it's easy for me to be in touch or go for a coffee or chat about the industry with people in the industry. And it's also where the headquarters of international companies are as well. So Sydney's kind of the place in Australia for that. So it is logical in that sense. But it is also a place where I kind of felt like suited me right now. I'm in a really awesome part of the city. I'm close to the beach. I like to, be outdoors. I like to surf. I like to be able to, be in the ocean, near the ocean as well. And I gave myself a good runway of time to be able to step away from the ships, which I've done for the remainder of this year, to be able to work on the consulting business and start to, really, really have time where I'm not getting taken away from this and going on a ship and, working crazy hours each day. I can kind of facilitate the growth of this more.
So are you at a point right now in your life where you meet somebody like potential friends, potential romantic partners, whatever? But I imagine that if you're in Sydney and you meet somebody, you've got an Aussie accent, you're from Australia, and they're a little less likely to kind of like, why are you here? Where are you from? How long are you going to be here? Because even though you spent a long time in Bali, I could still imagine, I've been in Bali, and I can imagine a local or somebody else that maybe lives there that's like, are you really here? Do you really live here? How long are you going to be around? Where I feel like you could probably just blend in and avoid some of those questions if you say, yes, I live in Sydney. You don't have to tell them it's a short-term rental or anything. Where like I'm in Colombia right now, so I meet people and it's like, why are you here? Are you here with family?
Yeah.
Where do you live? How long have you been here? How long are you going to be here? So have you noticed that already just by being in Sydney? Does it feel a little bit more like you belong or because I'm looking
Yeah.
for answers here
What?
because I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. So give me some insights here.
Yeah. No, honestly, 100%. And this is the longest I will be in one place for since I started in expeditions. And, a lot of those early conversations you have with people, like we touched on before, is I'm here now, but, this is what I do. And I'm super excited about my job and they find it interesting. But practically, it has its challenges straight up and it can filter through a lot of potential suitors early, which is good, but it's also a little bit, damn it, I wish I was in a different situation when I had this conversation with her.
I
So,
get it. I get it.
what,
I can relate to
yeah,
that 100%. Yeah.
wh-
So, all right.
when I came to Sydney, I consciously started to invest in people more because, I know I'm going to be here and this could easily be somewhere that I end up staying for longer, you know, next year, the year after, who knows? It's kind of all to unfold. But when I when I mentally put myself in that position where it's a matter of making more of an effort to meet and get to know people and get introduced into social circles, and it actually felt quite good to say I now live in Sydney. This is what I'm doing. I've had this crazy last close to a decade traveling around the world, and now I feel like I'm in the right place for me in terms of being more settled. And you probably don't realize it at the time, but if you're doing it for yourself, because I I do want those things for myself in the future. I was hoping that by luck it would stumble my way and I wouldn't have to give up this transient nomadic lifestyle where I could, still have the best of both worlds and maybe by chance meet this incredible woman who, is okay with me being away for work and is okay with me, not having a house and not having a car. And
Yeah. I've
but
been
I
thinking that for about 4.5 years now, and I'm like finally coming to the conclusion where it's exhausting.
well,
It's exhausting.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So all
but
right.
I did want to. I guess I wanted to. I didn't feel any. There was no hesitation in giving myself the best chance for something to. I was making myself more available, I would say, and you know, here I am. And when I answer questions like that, can honestly say what is the truth, which is, I do plan on being here, and I'm not going away just yet, and I am, looking
You don't
to.
have to discuss visas because you're an Australian citizen. So
Yeah,
it's like, yeah,
yeah, and
I'm
and
here.
kind
I
of the
have
more
no
you
reason to leave, and
the more you
it's
travel and see the world, the more you realize, hey, it would actually be pretty nice to end up
yeah.
somewhere kind of close to home, close to family, with someone who, is happy to be there and come into your life that way. But I'm a blank page with that and what might happen. So
Well, you and I need to stay in touch so I can learn some things from you because
vice
I'm at
versa,
about
yeah.
that spot too because it's I meet people and it's like how long are you gonna be around? Well, I've got 90 days left on my visa and then I'm not sure.
Yeah,
It's like
okay.
that's not really great
Well,
for dating. But anyway, Peter, we've discussed a bunch of things, some of them on topic, some a little off. Fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you being so open and willing to share so much. And I'm curious, what did I forget to ask you? What do you wish I would have asked you? Or in other words, what do you want to make sure that our listeners hear about you, about Beyond Expedition Consulting, or just life in general before we wrap up?
yeah, sure. So something that hasn't come up, but I guess we were very close to it coming up is the life of a expedition guide who works on ships, right? And we mentioned about you're always at work, you're always around people, you're in kind of confined spaces. I think there's not many opportunities that come up when you're on board to maybe express how challenging it can be because, most of your conversations are kind of with people going through the same thing, or you're talking to guests who they want to hear, you love it, you love everything, everything's a dream. Wow, I wish I did what you were doing when I was young. But it's high stress, high reward for sure, and everybody loves the reward, and we all, get an endorphin kick when we get to do cool things or we make decisions that turn out to be the correct ones. But in expeditions and in remote environments where there's a lot of variables and things outside of your control, there's a lot of pressure to make the decision that turns out to be the right one. And sometimes you're never going to know whether that's correct until it happens. And for me, that was a huge struggle when I first started working as an expedition leader because try as you might to have plan A, B, C, D to be able to fall back on if things don't work out how they could the next day. You would spend a lot of time ruminating on maybe what you should have done, or if this happens, I should have, because you have a lot of power to, decide where the ship goes, what the activity is, what the experience of the guest is going to be,
Whether people are
and
safe or not, I
people's
know things
safety,
happen.
the
Yeah.
the the team, the guest safety, your own safety. And I would really struggle with that. I'd ruminate and I wouldn't sleep. And it was, compounding because then the next day, the same thing would happen. And it was almost no respite. And for me, it was a real learning curve because you have to compartmentalize the things that are in your control and the things that are outside. And you can have all this data and information coming to you, and that can be from, your own research, what you're doing online, looking at weather forecasts, other people in the expedition team, other people who have worked as expedition leaders. But essentially, you you filter that and you make the decision, and you need to trust yourself as well because There's, no use playing over every scenario in your mind. The only one you have to play is what happens the next morning when you wake up, and then suddenly it's okay, now we're on. And, this is going to be a challenging day, or in hindsight, I wish we were dealing with this instead of where we are now. And what I wanted to just highlight is that takes a toll. It is a real, it's your personal brand. So, you kind of feel responsible for a lot of things, but the experience and the safety is one thing. And don't get me wrong, it's highly, there's a lot of praise and it's highly rewarding, but you deal with that and the pressure and releasing that pressure in your own way. And for me, I probably was doing things that helped me cope, but they weren't sustainable. And I really felt like, hey, if I keep putting myself in this situation, and I am, eventually sometime that luck will go against you and you might find yourself in a really dangerous, high stress situation. And I just want to highlight that we need to be at our 100% when we put ourselves in these positions. You should be at your most mentally and physically fit and healthy position, because it's a very demanding position, and you need to protect that part of yourself. And I needed to do that by stepping away, which I've done now, and just giving my nervous system a chance to reset and focus on some other things in life, which might be my own kind of personal fitness and my own mental well-being, and almost allowing enough time to pass that I can take myself away from a high stress environment, build myself back up again in the sense of, mentally and physically strong, and then go back and have a continued go. So longevity in this career is important, but I've seen already a lot of burnout, a lot of, people in situations that are responsible have made a decision and they may regret it, or they made it because they weren't at their sharpest. And yeah, it's not the place for that. So as much as you can always accept the next contract or take another chunk of money for going away and working, you do need to look after yourself.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned balance.
That's the most important.
You mentioned balance a few times. And I suspect, I don't know, I've been on an expedition ship leading a group, but that just means, just socializing, just showing up. And I wasn't, I didn't have the responsibilities that the people on the ship had. And I suspect that anybody that has spent more than a few months in a role like that, listening to you right now, is like, oh yeah, yep, I get it completely. Because I even get it just from managing an offshore resort, which was similar in some ways. It can be incredibly stressful. And as I heard you sharing that, I was like, do you guys on the ships, you have access to Wi-Fi so you can do video calls if you wanted to? I'm just curious. Typically, yeah.
Yeah,
do you think?
And probably ever since I've started, there's usually Wi-Fi anywhere the ships go in the world these days, so you can. Yeah, you can have contact to the outer world.
So if I was somebody that worked in the mental health field, a therapist, a coach, or something like that, listening to this conversation right now, that was travel inclined and maybe was a guide or something in the past, I'd be thinking, geez, there's a business opportunity here. Maybe it already exists, but wouldn't it be great if like the companies had somebody on staff, like a staff therapist or somebody that they could do video calls with the team once a week or something like that? Does that exist? Is that something you would suggest? Is that, maybe it already exists, but it sounds like it would be really helpful.
Yeah, so you would probably find the usual avenue on board is through human resources. They probably have an umbrella of a number of different roles, and no one would probably associate, counseling or therapy through that. But there would be avenues within a bigger company to kind of be able to have a chat and say, hey, I'm struggling, or hey, I feel like I need an outlet off the ship, or maybe some like professional feedback. But yeah, I agree. I think the product really is the personal experience that the expedition team can give, and your company and your product is so much better off if that person is in a good space and they're able to give their best. And trust me, the most talkative, extroverted person after 2 months on the ship, they're going to be a completely different personality type. And that's why the contracts are normally around about 2 months. But yeah, I think there's a real opportunity there. And I would just hope that people use the the time they have when they're not on the ship to see that as, okay, well, now I've got the time and now I've got the access, different avenues I can explore.
To recharge instead of just go drink every night or isolate in a room
because
somewhere.
that's extremes, you're so on, and then suddenly nobody wants a thing to do with you, and you don't have an alarm clock that needs to go off. You don't have to be anywhere, and everybody can go about that how they choose. You do need to find what works for you, because you can't sustain yourself at that level for 12 months of the year.
It sounds like you got a whole nother business idea in mind. It sounds like you're an expedition leader coach as well. You can help people negotiate this, because just having somebody to talk to that gets it, that's not sharing a cabin with you or not on the same boat, just because I get why obviously the guests don't want to hear it. The boat captain doesn't want to hear it. HR probably doesn't want to hear it. The other naturalist guides don't want to hear it, because you're all like, yeah, you and me both. Like, what, Yeah, so anyway, that's interesting. I'm happy you brought that up. Fascinating conversation. Peter, anything else before we go? I don't want to. I told you we'd have a chance to discuss anything you want, but do you think we've covered most everything? Or?
Yeah, covered
about an hour more than we thought,
which has been awesome. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and have a chat, and I love talking about the industry and expeditions, and of course my own story getting here. So I appreciate the chance to come on and have a good chat, and always open to future conversations, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch.
It's why I do this, because I enjoy it as well, and I'm so fortunate to have the opportunity to have a couple hour long conversation with somebody like you that has such a unique. It's interesting because everybody on the show's got their unique story, but it's amazing how much overlap there is, and I never would have realized that when I started this. It's like after a couple hundred conversation, it's like, wow, which just makes me even more excited about doing it, because you'll listen to somebody. You mentioned right before I hit record that you were listening to a conversation that I had with somebody else that you have some connections with in the past, and it's just pretty cool. So, but we can't do it without folks like you coming on and sharing stories, and honestly, like, getting kind of vulnerable. I mean, we were talking about some deep stuff, so I appreciate your willingness to do that.
That's true. No, it's good. It's it's a platform to get it out there, and we're a pretty small industry, and it's all about networks and connections, and just being able to put some of these stories out there.
Very cool. Well, let's you and I get to stay in touch, and we'll have more conversations in the future. But thank you so much, and hope you have a great day, Peter. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. Yeah, you too. Ciao.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.